Okay, now let me say a few words about why I have been so very fortunate in El Cerrito. I first drove into the village in October of 1979. That was almost 30 years ago. And it was late in the afternoon. I had a hard time finding the village. I first tried to come down the river from Villanueva. I discovered I couldn't. Went back to Villanueva, got directions to get here. I didn't get here until maybe 4:30 in the afternoon. The sun, you know, was getting low in the sky in October. And as I drove into the village in my little Volkswagen Bug, I was driving down the middle of the three streets, the one that's right by the church, and I was going probably 2 miles an hour, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, appeared a woman with her arms like this, stretched right in front of the car. I mean, she was standing right in front of the car in the road. And so I turned off my car, I got out, and she looked at me and she said, "What do you want?" And I said, well, I'm a university professor, and everybody knows they're harmless, you know. And I am here to try and find 5 villages that I might come back to next spring to study, because I am going to make a study of the demography of these villages, you know, village depopulation. She says, well, you'll have to come talk to my husband. So I drove, she walked over to the top of the driveway for Jack and Heidi Landstra's, and she took me down to her husband, Jack. And what began as a rather adversarial encounter actually turned out to be a very cordial visit, because I explained that I was teaching at the University of Oklahoma. I was hoping to have this as a village. I was really hoping to have this as a village that I would study, because I had read Leonard and Loomis as a graduate student, this wonderful, 50-page booklet about the village that had been done by 2 rural sociologists and published in 1941. And I knew I had excellent data for 1940 for the village from their study. And I knew I had excellent data for the village from 1900 census. And here I was going to be here in 1980, you know, perfect 40-year cross-sections. And I was really hoping that El Cerrito would work out. But I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know it was going to be a ghost town. Didn't know if anybody was going to live here. But, okay, so here came Heidi. She took me to see Jack. And by the end of our hour-long conversation, sitting down there by their irrigation ditch, they said, well, you just tell us when you want to come back next spring, and we'll spread the word to our Spanish neighbors. They were the only Anglos that lived in town. Everybody else was Spanish. We'll just spread the word to our Spanish neighbors that you're our friend, and we would like for them to talk with you. Oh, man, you know, what could be better? So by now it was really getting dark, and I was driving out the other road, the one that goes to the north, and there were 3 cattle guards that one had to stop, you know, and open and drive through and then hook back up again, 3 gates. And every time I got out of the car and opened up one of those gates, I looked up at those stars and I said, man, this was my lucky day. I really was just on a high, simply because I was invited back. And I learned years later, after coming out here many times, that John Ehrlichman of Watergate fame drove into this village at some point after Watergate. He was living in Santa Fe. And some villager came out of one of the houses down there by the plaza packing a pistol. And, you know, Ehrlichman got out of his car, and this guy came up to him and said, what do you want? And Ehrlichman said, I'd just like to kind of look around this village. He says, like hell you will. You know, and Ehrlichman got back in his car and drove off. And that wasn't an isolated instance, you know, so I really was very fortunate. So that was my good fortune number 1.